For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mara Williams. I'm the longtime curator here at the Brattleboro Museum and Arts Center, and this is the second time I've worked with Doug on a show. He was in a two-person show 13 years ago, maybe, something like that, with his large canvases. I've admired his work really for 30 years now, since I first moved to town. And so we thought we should do a solo show. It's about time. We've known each other 30 years. We should do a solo show. And I've certainly been to Doug Trump's home and studio a lot during these years to see the work grow and expand and his constant production. I have to say, like many artists, Doug does studio time every day, whether it's a large, tough, long commitment with a big canvas, or he has some pieces that are about this big. And they're quick, and they're mark making, and they loosen him up. And in each thing, what I do love about his work is he finds delight in the mark. Just making a mark delights him. And his touch is so deft that it delights me to view his mark making. And so we put this show together. I love the title because I do know that he was the yard man for years in the railroad. So this long panel, this sort of railroad tie feel, the underpinnings of the Polaroids, which give them both that sort of boxcar window effect, but also it gives them the landscape outside a window and how it rushes and chatters by and how the tracks chatter as you go down them. So it's a multi-pronged, sensuous experience, of these very intimate paintings. And so what we'd like tonight is, I've just told you what I love about the paintings. I can go in further detail if people want that. And Doug's going to tell you what he loves about making the paintings and what he thinks while he's making and where he's come to those things. And then we're going to just talk about the work, because I'm assuming that all of you have either a deep familiarity with Doug's work because you've been looking at it for a while, or that you've come to the show and you've come back a couple of times, or maybe you got to spend some time in it earlier. And it's fine if people want to float away and then float back in again, although we are being taped tonight, and so when we start really speaking, Andy's going to take charge of what it is that we're doing. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my friend and an artist I admire greatly, Doug.
Right. We're limiting this to first names.
It's too hard for me.
I mean, I like my middle name. That's enough. Well, thank you, Mara, for your comments. Also, thank you for inviting this work to be here. And for everyone, I don't know staff-wise how many folks are here, but thanks to Danny, of course. And
whose cat's sick, or he would be here. He's going to go to the vet tonight.
Yeah. Sarah Freeman is wonderful. A lot of hands-on work. There's a lot of effort that goes into this. It doesn't just happen.
Right. Tim Allen, who's per diem, another wonderful painter.
Tim Allen and Aaron.
15 years has been our preparator. And
he's
Aaron
great.
Jenkins.
He's great.
Yeah.
And Aaron and Jessica.
Mm-hmm. And Michelle, our newest office manager.
Yeah. So, anyway, thank you to those folks, truly. Yeah, this body of work really totally came out of left field. I happened to be fortunate enough to build a studio, I didn't build a studio. I was there when the studio was being built. I had input to the situation. But there were, in any building, there are windows, and there was just window trim that wasn't used. And I was kind of looking around, and it occurred to me that this would be why not? Had another idea for it, but that kind of fell apart. How to utilize that wood, and I had lots of Polaroids. I've taken Polaroids for many years, and I thought that would be a good way to assure activity. And I've always been interested in surface and attached and collaging, and that's how that began. And I knew that these were photographs, but the reason for those photographs being present was not to present them as photographs. It was just to kick the action into being. So that is how they got laid down, and then just moved from there. But one thing that was totally distinct for me, for what I've been up to, is that the format of this work was quite obviously horizontal format. I'd never worked, stuff that I had done had never been so focused in that format. So along with that goes a reading. I mean, we go left to right, and so you get a sequencing. I've always been interested in those images of movie stills, those 8mm, 16mm movies. I love that stuff. And my grandfather had a I don't know if it was 8 or 16, but both grandfathers took movies, and I was always really fascinated with the sound of it and just the action of it. It was great. So that's how that began, and like most things for me, I'm just interested, pretty deeply moved by finding out what's happening, finding out what's going to happen. So it's and if you don't do anything, nothing happens, and if nothing happens, nothing's there, and so it's an accumulation. It's very reductive. I can be obnoxiously reductive, perhaps, by some people's measurement. And so that's where that came from, and they were very much, because of the the shared physicality of the work, they were very much there was a unity in that. They were a group. It is, and the number 12 is a great basic number in our way. So that's kind of a take on them.
So tell me, when you're layering, you've started with this format, you've gotten your little chattery sequence down. There tends to be another white ground in most of them, and then you start a system of mark making. What are you exploring on those surfaces when you just?
I'm just interested in. It sounds quite mundane, but really, I trust in this. I'm aware of the process enough. I have enough of a relationship with that process to know that actuality unfolds by action, by the doing. And so I find myself just initially interested in using the materials, in covering things. And there's a lot of tape in those as well, and I've always been interested in tape. So the thinking is just to get going, and really it doesn't. Well, it refines itself because the considerations are more. There are more considerations visually, as there are more visual incidents. So it becomes a little bit more thought involved. And at the same time, there's always a balance to not thinking and to be in the doing of it, to let the doing of it just move on into the physicality.
Well, there's a very assured mark making that you have. When he just picks up something and he goes shoop, and it's smooth and it's straight and it's a gesture complete. You can feel the back of his spine and his arm completely motivating across, and it's very assured. There's no shaky. There's beautiful mark making in it. But then I've noticed with the back of a brush or with a pencil, you almost turn yourself upside down and sideways or blindfold yourself, and you make these scribble marks, which for many people say, well, why did he mar the surface? There was something really. So what's that all about? What's the beauty and then the accident thing going on?
Well, their line is a really fundamentally appealing aspect of making art for me. Drawing. There's never not drawing in what is happening for me. And there are very different kinds of there are very different kinds of lines that are made. There's that delicate sort of shaky, just almost not even involved in it, to on the other end of the spectrum, and at times I think there's probably some marker, Sharpie markers. They make some nice wide Sharpies. And it's about choreography. I mean, all of this is really choreography and composition, and and sounds. I mean, there's a kind of a music. I mean, and something of an indirect musical reference that goes on, because they have a dance and a musical compositional aspect to a degree, I think. More dance, more choreography. So each of the moves, if you will, bring you into a different dynamic that you want to move, that you want to interject with, that you want to balance through. So it's very, the more the better. My feeling is, and it was interesting you said about turning oneself over. There are times when it's really useful to work on a composition from another orientation. It gets you out of the expected requirements or urgencies of that composition to where it's much more freewheeling. And this is not something that happens regularly. But if that's the word, kind of the indication that's coming from the work that I really do believe in, then I'll kind of the work won't turn over. I'll move around it. Which is easy to do considering that it's on the floor. It's not like you can get the idea. So it's, that has relevance to what's going on.
I've also noticed that it's, I think partially because these boards, the way they stand proud from the way they're made with the back piece on them, so they have a real physicality to them, but you've got both added and subtractive marks in them. So sometimes you're excavating down through the Polaroid, or you've pulled the tape back off again. Sometimes you've put something on and then you take the back of a brush, or you take a stylus of some sort and you subtract from a puddle of paint that you might have put down, and then you subtract from it. Right. So there's something, although it's low relief, there's something very sculptural about these works. Like, I've always felt you had to excavate a Doug Trump surface, but these times I really feel, despite how small they are, that they have a really sort of rugged sculptural presence that goes further than your large work has.
I think the fact, probably as you're talking, what I'm thinking about is that because they start as such a physical being, and they start. And one thing that's wonderful about the physicality of these things is that they're hard to hurt. I mean, I've stepped on things. I mean, I've done damage over the years to things, or what you thought was damage. It's just part of, then you go on, but. Those really call to that blatant physicality. Use the word physicality again. Yeah, I think that's true. And the fact that there are those Polaroids that I'm really interested in obscuring. I mean, it's not about photography. They're just a vehicle to get the thing going. But so that really lends itself to the situation. I think subtraction is, I mean, it's great. It's just a bloody surprise, And if you enough, you need to believe in what's going on. You need to be interested in what's going on. It's not even believing. You just need to be fundamentally interested in what's going on. And so you take different approaches. The variety of approaches is really wonderful. And it's not, it's not all good time. It's not, there are like kind of dead times, but one just keeps moving. And then you look up, and it's a great experience to then see things that didn't previously. I mean, it didn't exist. Art making is, a little bit. I get a little, but it's really quite magical.
Great. We have a number of makers, artist makers.
There are a few people here who are involved in art making,
and as well as some of us who are lookers. So is there anything else you wanted to add to what we've said already before we involved some of our friends in conversation with it?
No, which I'm terribly interested in. More than hearing myself.
So Andy is in charge of, how do you want us to work this since you're recording?
Well, my excellent sound person is going to be using a microphone, so once she gets in place, it's just open to questions and responses.
By the way, thank you for all venturing forth, being here. It's great. It's really great seeing all the people, most people who I mean, a few people who I don't know here, or who I don't have an acquaintance with. It's really heartwarming. Thank you
for coming out on such a sort of
even you in the back, even you way back there.
A rugged night. So I've said what interests me about this work, and Doug's talked a bit about it, his process and what's interesting to him as a maker. So would anyone like to ask a question or make a comment on your response to the work, which is always interesting to us? Okay, right over here. So let's just...
I've, of course, had the privilege of being in your studio and seeing your work. And I've seen how some of it progresses over time. So I'm just curious what relationship these pieces have to time and how long they took and how you layered it in there.
Well, it's hard to ignore time, isn't it? Hard to get out of time. Although we will be out of time at some point. Time, there's no rush to these things. Absolutely no rush. No hurry. Sometimes for some there are substantial pauses. Things just kind of wait. This particular body of work was commenced in 14, I think, and pretty much came to a screeching, ignominious halt around 16, about 2 years, 3 years. There's one piece that kept getting reworked, and that went to this last year. But it's great, those of us who make work. I mean, for me, it's really wonderful to let the piece be. Just let it be for as long as it wants to be left alone, almost. Sometimes things happen very early that are very appealing. It's almost kind of those of us who are process-driven, it's almost a death knell. It's very disconcerting. Jesus, this thing happened. I'm so attached to it. It's a great lesson to be oblivious to that as well as you can be, and to, sally forward. But to let something alone is really a great. Let it have its time. Respect it. And then you walk back into the situation, and some set of circumstances just say, it's time. And with that kind of, there's an appropriate assuredness to doing that. It's not, and you have to detach from being too concerned about disrupting that composition. to the further good, hopefully, eventually. You know, if you just stick with it long enough, something will happen. You know, something will show up that's appealing. No, I feel very fortunate to be involved, and as we all do. I mean, all of us who are working this stuff, it's a great, you know, it's a wonderful thing to do. So.
Well, in all your layering, if you get really frustrated with it, just another coat of the
Well,
base.
it's just another.
Back into it again.
And it's a win-win situation because these are physical things, and so what's to lose? And then the subtraction piece is really relevant. It's highly relevant. Because I feel, boy, lacking any other game in town, you can always take a knife to, particularly the Polaroids, because the Polaroids, it's the great physical things. You can just take a knife or a end of a nail and score it, and oh, geez, right, I just tore the thing, and it's like, oh, yeah, okay, I just tore, and they're beautiful underneath.
Yeah,
They're really
there's a layer.
fantastic underneath. The surfaces, they're immaculate. They're really lovely. So anyway, I don't mean to be too positive about the whole thing. It's not. I've nearly, well, no.
Stop now.
I'm
your
cut.
head.
That's
Shuffle
it.
your head. Would anyone else like to comment on the work?
In how the pieces recapture your attention as you're wandering your studio. How do they recapture your attention and so that you engage with them again? Are they left out? Are they always there for you to? Are they dancing for you? You know, or are they, or do you have to pull them from some secret place? Or
That's a great comment, question. It's really. The manner that I guess I would say it's twofold. There are times when there's a separation between where I work and where I live. And there are times when information will emerge perhaps about a piece or a body of work that just says it's time to get there. More prominently, it's a situation of walking in and just being open, being visually, having your eyes be sensitive and be open and touching on all that information, the various activities that are being presented to you. For me, I really think of these things as being very organic. They have a real presence to them. So it's like in life and relationship. If you open yourself to them, you see them, you feel them, and they give to you. So I think it's that combination from internally and through one's own self, the respect and the sensitivity to the piece itself, because they're really on their own, particularly when when they come to a stop, they're absolutely on their own. So thank you. That's really, never heard that kind of question.
Someone over in this corner.
This piggybacks on that. So I know I've seen 15+ year paintings that Doug's worked on, that he's pulled out again. And I'd like the two of you to have a dialogue more as a curator. You're sort of like stopwatch, because you're gonna hang now. You might hang now, and then it may go quiet, and then you may take that same piece and 4 years later, pull it out again and make touches on it.
That's why artists have to have really good records, because those are the things that art historians and later people who are trying to look at your whole body of work and assess it and how it goes together and what you're moving through. So having on the back of a canvas 2013-2016, knowing that it was one of those things that was in the studio and it's in that body of work that moved and moved and moved and moved. And then all of a sudden seeing 2020 on the back corner of it, knowing that it was exhibited over here and it left here in 2020, but it started here in 2019, it means somehow when it came out of the museum, he still wasn't satisfied and he went back into it. And so the record keeping that a studio should have is not always what it does have. I might say that when I'm getting into a more historical perspective on an artist's career, as opposed to, you know, we're a contemporary art museum. It's largely somebody's a newer body of work of a working, living artist. Occasionally, I'll do something like this, where this particular artist, the room we're sitting in, Thelma, was really important to the development of painting in the state of Vermont. And it started in the 1970s, and so I've done a sort of retrospective on it, but that's not generally what we do at the Brattleboro Museum and Art Center. So generally, you're seeing a fairly contemporaneous body of work. Almost every artist I know wants to show their newest thing. By the time I'm trying to get them onto a calendar somewhere, it's, well, can you wait to see what I do before we do, if it's 3 years out? And I'm like, well, I just love this body of work. This is the body of work I want to show, but I'll have new work by then, Mark. Can you just hold off on your final decision? I'm like, well, I've made a commitment to you, and I've made a commitment to your work to show it. Of course I will, but it's really intriguing to me how many artists want to show the newest body of work, not something that they made 3 years ago. Doug is an exception to that. I have to say, in the time I've worked with him, Doug has some very large canvases, and then he's got a whole body of work that's the size of a silk screen. There was a silk screen company going out of business, so he has a whole series of that. Then he has these beautiful panels of about that big. I have one of those. And then he's got smaller works on paper as well. And so when I went, I had no particular body of work I wanted to look at. And he said, well, Mara, I saw that gem of a show you did where some of the paintings were only this big, and I've got some small work, and I'm thinking small work in a larger gallery might be pretty powerful. I said, well, I certainly learned my lesson about small work being very powerful. You have a huge wall and one small piece on it. And I said, I'm game, what do you want to show me? And he showed me 2 bodies of work, and I was completely captivated by this one. It did have much more of a physical, Doug always has is interesting compositionally. It is a dance, it is choreographed, and it is very musical. And he makes beautiful marks of all sorts. And Doug also has a fairly restrained palette. Not that there wouldn't be a zip of red in something that was largely, soft mossy greens and yellows, but it's usually pretty restrained palette. And as a Cape Cod kid, I love a restrained grayed off palette. It's just, I can find endless things to look at in that. And this, although again, it was a limited palette, it was a very different palette for me, because it has that white creaminess to it, and then some of them have very little color. It's white and gray, and some of them have the yellow and a zip of some other color in it, but it's a very lighter, more open, and I think with the embedded Polaroids and this landscape, and then sometimes there is this sort of tracking cellular rhythm structure going on top of them. I just really responded to this work. I was like, well, if you're willing to go small, because most artists don't want to go small, they want to show the big stuff, And because how often do you get a 10-foot ceiling or a 14-foot ceiling to show your work in? And so we just dove right into this body of work. I find them a very rewarding viewing experience. I go in that gallery all the time, and I can just sit with one painting one day and then come up, if I'm upstairs 3 days later, and just go to one more painting and sit in there for 20 minutes or half an hour just with one painting.
Well, that's the great offering, isn't it? I mean, to art.
Just go right back into
I
it.
mean, that it's theirs. I mean, it's waiting to be engaged. It's not demanding anything. It doesn't need any apology. It doesn't need anybody to protect it. Oh, well, Mark Rothko might talk. Well, you should protect.
Never hang in with a west sun hitting anything, just so you know.
Right.
North light. Yeah, so that my experience with artists generally is they want to show the newest work, they want to show the biggest work. So I, of course, was just delighted to show this much more intimate.
Well, it's a great little room. I mean, it's a lovely room. I love that room.
I like all the galleries here.
Well, I didn't say that. I'm not
Don't
in contradiction to that.
No, it's a lovely room.
It's a great contained space, and which was I felt very appropriate.
Well, and at that scale work, it's you can get right up to each individual piece, but you can also stand in the middle of the room and scan and really feel the architecture of the work and the architecture of the work in relationship to each other, which I think is exciting. Okay, someone else? Speaking of the train.
I was wondering, so were all these pieces set up sequentially in your studio as you were working on them, or were they?
Well, no, there was.
When you were working on one piece, were you thinking of it in sequence to do
No. Well, I was thinking in it. I was thinking of. I mean, I knew that this was a body that was in association with itself. I knew these pieces were not. These pieces, although are individual, they weren't of an independence from one another. They were related. They're very much embedded.
But they're not numbered in a sequence.
No, they're not. They weren't, and they didn't. And when work is, for me, they were just on the floor. They were all. The group was pretty much together on the floor when they were being seen. At times they just get put away, which sometimes is really important to put things away and to not look at them at all. Let them, kind of ripen. It's like leaving that apple cider to become something different.
Someone else?
I'll ask you a question.
Yes.
Given all your years in the railroad yards, does that experience influence the series?
No, well, I'm glad you asked that question because it was really kind of happenstance that there's a title on anything in there, and the only title other than Untitled is one that I happened to write by rail on it. It's a distinct piece in there. It's a gray piece, and it has it's hard not to make that association because there is. I mean, we all pretty much know railroads. There is this railroad tie-like marking. It just happens, and when that just happened, and it felt really good. I mean, I have a deep association with freight trains, so that's why I wrote by rail. But as far as any cognitive input, intentionality in that work, it didn't have anything to do with that. I mean, but in your life, there are a lot of things you may not be aware of that, but they're all intrinsic to what it is you're doing, and so I adhere to that awareness as well. So non-intentional, and I wasn't thinking about it at all. And I don't like to pigeonhole anyone's experience.
Right, although I have to say almost immediately, because of the proportion of a board and the thickness of a board, not that they were 4x4s, and because of that rhythm structure that you set up with the Polaroids, it has an architecture. It has an architecture of a railroad car. It has an architecture of a railroad yard. It has an architecture of the windows, and the scenery, there's just a movement quality about the whole thing that is, it's not descriptive at all. It's a rhythm structure. It's analogous in some way. And it's interesting to me because people who don't know Doug Trump at all, they come from Keene and they're fans of mine, and they come over and walk in, didn't read anything, just sort of walked in and scanned and went, oh, it's like we're on a train moving through landscape. So it has a landscape reference and it has a rushing.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to disassociate from that at all. And when as we sit here, I looked at the window over the course of 35 years, looking at trains go by and working with trains all around me and movement. And it's fascinating. It's hard not for that stuff not to have its effect. And so it does come out, but there isn't that's not part of the process that I'm working. It's like the landscape. We're all on the landscape, right? The landscape, even if you're in it comes out. To my way of thinking, it's hard to not have it be there. That's where we are. And what's around you and outside the windows in the studio, it makes its way into livingness and expressiveness.
Someone else? Yes, please.
I read recently a piece about the artist Amy Selman, and the writer of the article went to a slideshow, and she showed the process that she went through with one piece, one work that she did, so 4 or 5 different versions of that. And her final version was very much like the first, that she had done this particular representation. It was a bird on a boat or something, and she covered it over, and it was totally different. Then she covered that over, and then she covered that over, and ended up coming back to the kind of the original idea. And so I wondered for you if you hold on to your original idea in your process, does it end up going where you thought it would, or does it become radically different?
There really isn't a thought other than the present. And yet, for the most part, work begins very elementally, in a very reduced elemental fashion. It just begins very simplistically for the last few years. And what will happen over the course of time, there's a love, there's a real appeal and enjoyment of that kind of simplicity that is hard to forget about. And so there's a process that goes on, and what happens to go on in my stuff, I think it's true, is that things become complex and then they simplify. They close down with a lot of stuff, and then they open up. And some things get left, some things get taken out. But of late, there's also a returning to that kind of compositional simplicity. But because of the nature of paint, there's always, everything counts. It's not like, it's unimportant to talk about what it's not like. There's a history, and you know what that history is, and you can see that history. You can feel that history. That history is there physically, if only. So there's a kind of richness and complexity in what may be that resulting simplicity, which brings you back to where, perhaps returns you in the direction from where it began. It's a complex thing. Emotionally, it's a complex thing too, because you can remember, and if you've been unfortunate enough to do a lot of documenting of your work, particularly with videos, you realize, oh my God, it was so nice, man. Wow, yeah. But you just, that's not what it's about. It's about getting to the life of it, getting to the depth of it. But there is an appeal and a call back to things mentally, I guess, at times. But again, it's not planned. There's not a plan.
Jasper Johns is famous for saying, make a mark, do something to it again. So that's
that's hard.
Do something to it again.
That's hard to, what you see is what you get. Stella, these things are truisms. I mean, they kind of can get poo-pooed, but they really hold content. They really do.
In the back of the room, please.
This is a more general question and about your process of how you create. Do you have a time of day that you consistently go to create, to make work, to go to the studio, or do you binge? Like you're like, okay, I'm just going to be in there for 72 hours straight, and then I'll take a shower and eat something. Is it like every morning at 6? What's your creative process when you're working? Does that make sense?
There isn't. I mean, I wouldn't wouldn't reference it as a kind of a binge activity. There are times that are more fecund than others. There are times, particularly in the winter.
So when he's not out on that mowing machine with his lawn.
When there aren't other things calling you. But it's, there's not a set routine. I can say that in my own working mode, there hasn't been a lot of, it's not totally the case, but there hasn't been a regular amount of working late. I tend to get late morning, maybe well into the afternoon. It's just, you feel better when you get something done. We all do.
In general.
In general, yeah. So, I wouldn't qualify it too much.
Anyone else? Yes, Carolyn.
Laura, you made reference to Doug's limited and somewhat subdued color palette. And I'm just curious as to whether you plan, there's layering and scraping and manipulation of the color. Do you make any plan with that, or is that just you lay something down and you respond once again? So how do you work with your color, and how planned is it? And what's your procedure?
Well, color is I don't know about any of you, but color is a tough thing to talk about, tough thing to compartmentalize. Color is just this, what in the world is color? But color has, as mark making does, color has force and color has weight, and it's the choices of color are very, they're not haphazard. They're very intentional. There are times in looking at a piece, as there is the reading of that piece and the information that's coming from that composition that says something needs to happen there, right? The eye is dead there. The piece is not pulsing. The piece is not holding. It's got a dead zone, kind of a dead zone. So that's an area for me, that's a key to go in. But the color, I'm really trying to linguistically compartmentalize that. It's really difficult to do. Color has a very particular force. Colors have, and complexities of color are just confounding. And color is incredible. I mean, think about gray. Whew. Gray is just, I mean, there are 5 million kinds of gray. You've got like black and white and
everything else.
everything else to whatever degree. So it's, but the color, but you know, I don't mean to get too zoned into somewhere other than exactly where I am, but the painting you have to, I mean, I don't know if this is really true. I mean, though the artist is the person making the painting, there's no doubt about that. But the painting has a real voice. The painting has a real say in the matter. Painting has the crucial say in the matter, in a real way. And seeing it like that, I think, if I can describe it, this has kind of been said. All of this has been said a lot. Nobody's saying anything that hasn't been said. But the being of that sensitivity really gets the maker of the piece out of the way, which really gives credence and power, life gathered from the life that's there, from the painting. And that's if you really think about it, it's a fairly profound situation.
Well, your paintings are a real call and response to materials, movement, mark. They're not illustrative.
No.
You do. They're not representational outside of
Other than
your
what
marks.
might-
You know, you're a painter's painter, as it were. And so the need of that surface coming to completion it has to come to completion, and it's telling you what it needs, and you're doing something to it. And then all that editorial choice is yours, but ultimately this little object has to come into being.
Yeah, that's the kernel. You know, that's the gem. That's the joy. That's the gift.
Well, only because his son is here, I will quote, "Making is knowing." You know, very different work, yours to his. But Finn Campman's whole philosophical concept was making is knowing. You make it so that you know it, which is a fairly neo-Thomistic kind of philosophical stance. Somebody had their hand up back in the corner.
Yeah, that last section, to just kind of build on that a little bit, but the sense of the communication that you have with the piece's insistence on being, and you recognizing that, and the kind of flow process that you've described. I'm curious, has it always been that way for you? Or is this something that you've come to? And if it's something that you've come to, have there been moments that have kind of pushed you in this direction?
I don't know if I could specify moments, but it definitely has been it's definitely a situation that developed over time from the experience of making art. You know, it's not irrelevant that, you know, none of us are working in a vacuum, and if we pay attention to what others have said and done and written, you know, we get information, really valuable information, and exposing yourself to that it's a ripe pool to get into. I don't know how exactly, Brian, how I would. There was a point when that became. When that became the working mode, but it didn't happen abruptly. It happened I've never thought about it. It's like I never thought about what Finn said, you know. But if I do think about it, if I do look back on it, I think that there was a period where, at some point, I mean, I believe that at some point you need to make your paintings. You need to write your book. You need to write your poetry. You need to do your dance. You need to, you need to do your work, your own work. And for me, it was something I could really hold on to, that you would not think this through, and that you would have this blatant support system for what you were doing. I'm sorry to be again reductive, but by doing it, that's where the life is. The life is in the accumulation of the time of the doing of the piece. And then for me and my way of thinking, then the magic of the whole situation is that you have all these things, you got 1,000 things that have happened over a lot of time. And then you have this thing that's that thing, right? It's just that thing. I used to think about this work, not my work, but work, art making, is that you had all of these accumulations of things over the course of weeks, months, years. And then you took this, that all happened out of time and all happened from physical actuality, that they got done. And they're physical things. And then they got taken right out of time into all time, right? They just got pulled out of the whole mechanism. And then you got, it's like slides in you remember this, in the slide holders, you can pull that slide out, and then that's the piece. But it's I don't know, I like thinking about it. It gives me, it's part of the deal. It's part of the deal. So it's looking, I think if you can find something that helps you move forward in what you're doing, there's nothing wrong with that. And whatever it is, whatever your work is, it's just that thing that you can really believe is true. First of all, you believe is true. It is true if you believe it's true, if it functions, and whatever the work is you're doing. So I think it came about. It was self-serving to the work, but it was authentic at the same time. Yeah, Peter.
I work outside too, so I'm pretty confident when you look back at your work, you feel the different times of day, the different days of the week, in the sense, rainy day, sunny day, and the best part, of course, in this area of the country, the different seasons. But did you consciously, when in the act of creating this, did you consciously think, wow, what were some nice memories in the winter, or on a foggy night, or
not
just let it flow?
Not per se, but I love the winter landscape. The winter landscape here is just marvelous, and it's so clear. The contrasts are so wonderful. It's just, it is like mark making. If we happen, it is on the landscape. I love architecture. I love buildings. I love figures, and everything's good. Everything's a go. But in the last years, I think the whole winter piece has really become a strong element. Just my being drawn to it visually, appreciating it visually. But again, it's the doing that is paramount. And in and of itself, the rest, there's plenty of time to think about. But to be doing in that moment is the realm, is the vehicle. So it's a real supportive framework. But yes, the landscape certainly has its presence in that work.
I really love what you were saying about it's almost in a non-narrative way, there's all this history of your mark making within each panel. Almost, and often the marks are so calligraphic. So it's almost like this palimpsest, or like the marks of your previous encounter is coming forward and covered and resonating with what has come above it. And it's challenging to think of that in a non-narrative way, especially with the photographs at the root.
Mm-hmm.
But I find that really exciting, though, too. Just that.
There's definitely as far as the work in the pieces of the work. I mean, there's certainly an inner relationship within that work. I'm not the bystander, but in a way, yeah, it just. It's just part of the richness of the whole thing, and sometimes those things have to go too. So, but then they can come back. You take a piece of sandpaper, you take a rag, just activate, right? Activate.
Well, you build surfaces that really do need to be excavated, like looking, peering behind, underneath, sensing little lumps, little ripples, echoes of a mark that's bleeding through a lighter mark that might have been put on top of it. So it's a constant sort of excavation process as you're coming across the canvas and looking into the canvas and the relational pieces. Somebody out here first, and then it's Raimundo.
Do you ever find paintings keeping you up at night? Or it's the first thing you have to take care of in the morning? Like, do they command that of you sometimes?
They don't.
Just close the door and say good luck and we'll see you tomorrow?
I look forward to seeing them tomorrow. That's a great delight, and that's a great anticipation to going and seeing. I mean, from having a break of a number of hours from the work, that's a great moment of going back into that environment. But they don't. I'm really trying to consider. I don't think that they've ever kept me up at night. It does happen that I'll get up in the morning and want to get out there, and will be aware of a particular painting that I want to, that something's got to happen. Something's got to give.
So the answer is yes.
So, yeah, right. Something has to succumb, to the need.
It sounded a little more anticipatory about mornings than staying up awake at night, however.
Yeah.
Karen.
Your marks have such an elegance and ease to them. They seem so nonchalant. Are you ever afraid, standing in front of your canvas, to go into it?
Well, this is kind of a two-part answer. I don't think there can be hesitation. There can be hesitation, but that comes out. Well, I think there are two ways that hesitation gets overcome. One is listening to the situation that's in front of you, and the other is not listening to the hesitation. Just sometimes not being. It's not with a sense of. It's not with a sense of belligerence. It's not with a sense of. come hell or high water. But there is a situation, sometimes it is so that you just, this piece, whatever it is, whatever you're attached to in that piece, in that composition, however beautiful, however lovely, however all those kind of things we can experience, the thing is not really happening. I mean, the thing as an overall is not really happening. So it is with that kind of, it's not a stubbornness, it's not an arrogance, it's not a lot of things, but it is sometimes, can be as simple as a determination to move from A to B, to the next B, or to the next A, if you will.
How do you know when you've got the thing? What is the thing for you?
I have a Ouija board. I've loved Ouija boards. You know, we had a Ouija board when we were kids at home, you know. It's just like, I love that. I rely on Ouija. How do you know? Somewhat. I'm sorry to be. But how do you know what? I'm not sure.
You said the thing isn't happening about the piece.
Right. There's a staticness. There's kind of you've been trying to make it happen too much. There was a painting the other day that was just trying to make these things happen in this painting. And Jesus crow, man. I mean, it's just like, enough already, right? Enough already. But you know, this is why I really believe that it's such a win-win situation, at least if you're kind of addicted to this manner of approaching this stuff, which I guess I am, you know that the nature of paint, it's not like you're lighting it on fire. You're not obliterating something. But your intention may be to obliterate it. But you know enough, you got a backstop, but you know enough to know that what you're gaining is a visual richness. Because paint is, I mean, by my way of thinking about paint, it's translucent. It's translucent. So, and then you have the physical aspect of it too. So there's a richness that you're gaining all the time. But yeah, there are moments of hesitation. There are absolutely moments you just sit there and you say, what in the world, you know? I mean, But then, what are you going to do, sit there all day? You know, right? I mean, you want something to happen. You want something to work with.
Well.
You want to cause an argument? No.
But he said, if something goes horribly wrong, he feels like there's a piece of sandpaper, there's another layer of white paint, okay, I've muddled it, let me do something else.
Ultimately, there's nothing wrong. You know, there's really nothing wrong.
Well, or you could be Raymond Rasikas and just take your garden hose to it, which was the funniest moment of any artist talk ever. He shows a picture, just took a garden hose to his painting. So it's bad weather. Unless anybody has a concluding thought that they'd like to, I think we should. Yes.
I think it would be important for those who haven't been in Doug's studio to realize what his studio is like and how much of what he has created is still there.
It's a rather large barn-like structure, and it is filled with paintings, and some of them are taller than I am and square, and others are a 4-foot square, and then there are smaller ones and works on paper, and then there are stacks of tiny little, I want to call them matchbox paintings. They're so intimate. There's some very beautiful small things. Some of them are simply you have walnut ink that you use, and they're almost zen in their intention and completion. So yes, there's a rich body of work.
Sometimes too much. Well, I mean, really, sometimes it's just too much, you know, and so you need to pick it all up, pile it all up, you know, so instead of 20 things, you got one, right? It's there are 20 there, but visually.
Right, but
But visually, sometimes you just have, it's like in a painting, when a painting gets too complex, it just gets too mumble jumble. I mean, for me, then it's the same sort of, that kind of thing. So no, a studio, those of us who go into our studios, they're great places to go into.
They are fun. I love doing that. Any last thoughts? Then I'm going to let you go because I don't know what the weather is really doing out there, and you live at the top of the hill on Cowpath 40.
Walk in. Thank you, really, thank you for coming. Thank you for your patience.